Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. It's an engaging and enlightening talk show on life, relationships, and the business of life. Grab a cup of juice and just chill. Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Live life. Live fully.
Thanks for tuning into our podcast. We love having you here, and it's our mission to bring you all the latest and greatest tips, skills, and know-how to make you the best that you can be. We know that you have it in you, and we're going to show you how. Now, let's get started.
To have you on the show today. My name is Omobola Stephen, and I'm your host on Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. Now, if you want to catch up with any of my missed episodes, simply go online and search for Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen on any podcast distribution platforms, and you'll have a really amazing and worthwhile listening experience as you do so. Now, this podcast focuses on self-development and personal improvement of amazing guests who come to the show to share their insight on topics and subjects under personal development. And it's been an incredible time having these guests, share their amazing and incredible insight on topics and subjects under discussion. Today, I have Dennis Harhalakis on the show today, who is the money coach. Welcome with me on the show, Dennis Harhalakis.
Thank you very much, Omobola. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dennis. I'm looking forward to your professional insight, especially on the subject of money. Right now, Dennis, what's the relationship between money and our feelings of self-worth?
Oh, you dived straight in with that one. Yeah, absolutely. Well, money is this complex thing that runs through our lives, and yet kind of no one's ever really showed us how to understand it or manage it. And I think at the heart of all the issues that we have with money is this issue. So, money is self-worth, absolutely. Society tells us, messaging from society tells us that money and self-worth, what we have, what we wear, what we drive, all of that stuff is all about self-worth. And I think that's fundamentally flawed. I think ultimately self-worth is really about who you are inside, not what you are on the outside. But the messaging from society is very strong around this connection between money and self-worth. And so we struggle with that. We struggle with that all our lives. And it's so, yeah. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Money brings you choices. Money brings you some level of freedom, but it doesn't bring you self-worth. Self-worth is who you wake up feeling in the morning. That's your self-worth. Your net worth is what's outside. That's what surrounds you. Your self-worth is when you wake up and go, I'm Omobola, and I am enough in who I am.
What is it about money, right, that you like my audience to be aware of?
So I think where I'd like to start with money is that most of us are trying to understand why it's so difficult to understand it, why it's so difficult to manage it. And where I'd like to start, I think really is a message of compassion and self-forgiveness, because fundamentally our brains are not wired for money, right? They just aren't. Money is a fairly new thing anyway. I mean, if you look at it in terms of evolution, it's 3, 4, 5,000 years old. Evolution is a much more longer process. And so, fundamentally, our brains are not wired for money. They're not wired to understand what long-term planning or long-term saving or any of that stuff looks like. They're not wired for money. And in fact, they're wired for the opposite, which is basically short-term gratification, an immediate response to danger. Now, those things are not really associated with managing money. So I think the other thing that's happened in certainly in my lifetime is that money's become very complex. It's become complex. We have debit cards, we have credit cards, we have the disappearance of cash, we have credit, we have a whole number of things that have evolved in the financial sense over the last 30, 40, 50 years that make it kind of difficult. When I was growing up, you had some money, you wanted to buy something, you needed to have the money first. You went to the shop, you handed over your money. That's a micro loss moment, and you got something back. It's a transaction. You gave something, you got something. And so that's fairly easy to understand and fairly easy for the brain to process. Now, if I want to buy something, I go into a shop and I wave my phone and it goes boop, and that's it. I get the thing. So there's no pain, there's no micro loss moment. In fact, spending has become frictionless. And that means it's very, very easy to spend a lot of money without having any idea where it's gone. And if you run out of money, don't worry, someone will offer you credit. Now, they're not actually offering you money. What you have to understand is they're offering you debt, and they're completely different things. So to get back to money, money has become complex. Managing it is difficult. That makes us anxious. And two of the biggest stresses for us as human beings are uncertainty and lack of control. And guess what? That's all over our finances. And I think at a fundamental level, no one's ever shown us how to manage our finances. No one sits down with us and says, Omobola, this is what you need to understand. Here you go. And they give us lessons, they give us compassion, they give us guidance, then they give us direction. No, that doesn't happen. What happens is that as humans, we copy what we see. So how many times do we see people saving money? Do we see them saving money? No, we don't see them saving money. Not so much, right? We see them spending money all the time. Our parents spend money, our friends spend money. As children, we grow up and we see them spending money. So, we have this misconception about what it's all about. And we don't start. So no one shows us how. All we see is people spending money. And we don't start with a blank slate. We have a subconscious inheritance that influences us. And this concept of how we understand money is based on what we see other people doing and the way that the messages that we get about money, the messages we get about ourselves, the messages we get about money on ourselves in childhood. Money doesn't grow on trees. Money does this, money does that. Rich people are corrupt. Rich people are lazy. Poor people are lazy. There's a whole bunch of messages we get. And because we're children, we're infants, we're sponges, we soak all this stuff up and it sits in the background. And later in life, we end up with a set of patterns and behaviors that come from our childhood, but we don't understand really what they're doing.
Sure. Growing up, what has been your biggest fear, about money?
My biggest fear around money came from my father, who was very anxious. My father was born in 1919, so he lived through a pretty turbulent period in the world, and he was very anxious about money. He was anxious about losing money. And interestingly enough, I did some research on my family history, and this came from his father. So his life, his lived experience made him anxious, but his childhood from his father was very fear-orientated. Fear, scarcity translated into angry, shouting, and a general kind of, level of anxiety around money. We don't waste money. We don't do this with money. Don't kick stones. I don't have enough money for shoes. I don't have enough money for this. I don't have enough. And over time, that builds up, as in we don't have enough money. And so that has patterns stayed with me for the whole of my life until I discovered money coaching and became a money coach. And I began to understand where my anxiety came from and how to manage that anxiety and to be more comfortable and more happy and generally easier to be around. And certainly I got more comfortable with money and my anxiety around it. But that took a long process. And I think most of us aren't aware of this. And I'm not trying to say that I'm, enlightened or in any sense, but the subconscious patterns, the subconscious behaviors, they plague us. And so actually being kind of worried about money is probably the better of the two options, than not being at all worried about money and never having any money. So that's also something that a lot of the time we don't control. We don't have conscious control over this. And so we end up in this situation where we don't understand this thing called money. And yet our education process teaches us that if we don't understand something, there must be something wrong with us, right? I'm doing something wrong. I don't know what it is. It must be me. How often have we heard growing up, why don't you understand this? What's wrong with you? This is really simple. What's wrong with you? Why did you do this? What's wrong with you? And so we internalize this issue with money, and we make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And when we make mistakes with money, we internalize it as there's something wrong with us. And when we believe that there's something wrong with us, it's really hard because we have shame and we have guilt. It's very hard to understand that it's not me, it's not you. And all you need is someone to show you how this thing works. But when we're trapped in guilt and shame, it's very difficult to move out of that space. And so we end up, because there's this culture of silence around money. We don't talk about how it makes us feel. And the doctrine around this financial literacy, financial education is typically about numbers. What don't you understand? Separate wants and needs. It's all about the maths. It's not about emotions. Just understand, just spend less than you earn. That's all. It's kind of simple, right? But that's not how it works. Because in our lives, the way we spend, what we spend, how we think, how we feel, though it's not a numerical discussion, that's an emotional thing at our core levels. And so until we begin to understand that, we can't change. So that's kind of a long answer. But I think, what I'm trying to get across here is that not managing your finances is perfectly normal and totally understandable. And we need to show people that that's okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just means no one showed you how. And it means that your subconscious inheritance from your childhood is playing out and causing you to do a bunch of things that you don't generally know why. How many times have you heard people say, I don't know why I do this. I can't seem to control this. I can't seem to manage that. That's your subconscious inheritance, the thumbprints of your ancestors or whatever they in your DNA. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay. You need to understand that and move forward with self-compassion and forgiveness.
Sure. Now, Dennis, right, can you share tips, right, both personal and professional tips on how people can manage money effectively?
Well, you have to start with the understanding that this is, something that you need to learn how to do, but you also need to understand that how you feel about yourself is a core part of this process. And you need to understand that as human beings, we're hardwired for immediate gratification and response to danger. So if there's something about your finances that is hard for you to engage with, that causes you discomfort, this is okay. It's normal, but you need to learn how to deal with it. And we need to start, as I said, from this place of self-forgiveness. So the first thing to get to starting point is it's complex, it's hard, and you've got a whole bunch of patterns. This is the most important thing to realize because it allows you to move forward. So in terms of kind of where do we start, this is where we start. How we move forward is, what messages did I get from childhood? What kind of things did people say? And start thinking about, how does that influence me today? Because if you want to change your behavior, if you want to start saving, if you want to invest, if you want to build wealth, all those things are about understanding what actually drives your behavior. So the 4 pillars, the 4 positive behaviors that allow you to build wealth over time are captured in a book called The Millionaire Next Door, which is written by a guy in the US. And the 4 positive behaviors, he interviewed 500 people that had built money over their lifetimes, and they all had 4 things in common. The 4 positive behaviors are, the first one is called frugality, which is a really kind of unpleasant word for basically saying, don't spend all your money. Now, this can be really hard. This can be really hard if you don't have enough money. right? It's not just a question of like, oh no, don't spend all your money. This is, a lot of people face a situation where they just don't